Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this evening. Got a good stream set up here for you. Going to be catching up on the news of the week with one of my very favorite co-hosts, American Ostrakon. American Ostrakon, thanks for joining me, man.
It's Friday night. I have no date. Just a 2-liter bottle of Shasta and my All Rush mixtape. Let's do this.
Well, I had to
Thank
make
you. It's a
sure.
pleasure to be here.
No, I had to make sure because all my co-hosts they're getting these girlfriends and whatnot, and it's I gotta make time, make sure we can get these things done. But yes, very very glad that everyone is with us this evening. We've got a bunch of news stories lined up. We're going to be touching also on a few basic concepts because I know we're getting a lot of new people kind of in the community and especially to the channel. And so we're going to be touching on a few things that might be a review for some people, but also might be new for some of you who are new to the channel. So we'll be going over that as we go over the news as well. So, the first thing that I wanted to talk about is going to be a little bit of what's been happening with this attack on a New York congressman. Let me bring that up here real quick. Um, so, there was an attempted stabbing of a New York congressman, and they immediately released this guy right after he had been arrested. So you can see the guy here. It's very odd. He's got a very weird weapon in his hand here. It's got like it's almost kind of like just finger
Oh, it's one
knives or
of
something.
those. Yeah, it's one of those. Looks like the hard plastic punch daggers that can double as like a keychain.
Uh huh. Uh-huh.
I know exactly. Give me 2 seconds and I will tell you what this is called. I think it's called like a Mad Dog. But go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, they're individual pictures of it too. But this guy uh, was jumped on stage with the congressman who's also running to be the governor of New York. He was at a campaign event, and Congressman Lee Zeldin here was attacked by this gentleman, 43 years old. Now, I guess he yelled out, "You're done," and then had the weapon. They came after him, and he was tackled by a number of people on stage. Luckily, the congressman was not hurt. So, the big story on this one is obviously sometimes there's just crazy people though, right? And we don't know who this guy is. You can see here he's got some kind of veteran's hat on here in the picture, or no, this is the yeah. So he's got that hat on, but we're not sure what his motivations are yet. They weren't exactly clear from what I was able to tell so far. But what we have seen is just in the last 6 weeks or so, two different attacks on conservative or Republican members of the government. Obviously, this is a Republican congressman who's running for governor, and we also, of course, had the attempted assassination of Brett Kavanaugh. And in both these situations, the media seem to take these very lightly. They seem to not be very interested in the fact that this was active attempts to physically harm or even kill sitting members of the government, which is obviously something that's been a huge issue. They've been making a huge issue of this in pretty much every situation, saying that there's these dangerous elements, these MAGA elements, Trump supporters, possible people in the military who might have right-wing sympathies. But then when actual violence occurs, when actual attempts on the lives of very important people occur, they seem to only happen or mostly, I should say, I guess, happen in the direction of people on the right getting attacked, and these things disappear from the media, of course. In this case, the gentleman was actually immediately released under his own recognizance here. You can see, and funny enough, this is what the congressman predicted. He said, under New York's laws, this man will probably instantly be released. So we can see, obviously, that he predicted that the leniency of New York prosecutors would basically have this guy released almost immediately, over even though he just attempted violence directly against a government official. And we're just seeing this consistently, these attempts to do violence towards people, especially on the right, and this getting swept under the rug, or in this case, the person getting immediately released from custody. Interesting that this is able to be disappeared on such a regular basis for a media narrative where this is the most dangerous thing happening. We just had Steve Bannon. He was just convicted of contempt of Congress for not testifying in these January 6th insurrection hearings. For people, a media that is just at every opportunity talking about how this is the downfall of democracy and how this kind of violence is supposed to be destroying the ability of the country to function. In one direction, it seems to immediately disappear the minute that it actually happens. We actually see attempts on people's lives on kind of the right here.
Sorry, just for those of us playing at home, it appears to be they call it a Brutus, which is a self-defense keychain. There's a couple different varieties of that, but anyway, it looks like it's a self-defense keychain he was looking to try and stab the congressman with. But yeah, it's again, we were talking before the show started. This is nothing new to us, but it is still worth pointing out that there's very much a double standard on how those who are within the correct political party are treated and how those who are not in the correct political party are treated when it comes to acts of violence, right? So imagine if the roles were reversed. I hate to say that, but imagine, if you will, that it was
Right.
I know, if it was a Democratic congressman or a Democrat who was attacked by some sort of conservative, actor of some kind, it would be plastered all over the news. It would be talked about for several weeks, and there would be some sort of call for some sort of weapon control as a result. But because this particular flavor of congressman is Republican, they quickly memory hole it and then move on to the next subject because it's not even secretly anymore. It's just it scares people in the Republican Party, and I don't believe that this is like a coordinated effort or anything. It's just when people do things like this, it serves the movement well. So therefore, we're not going to prosecute it, or we're going to very minimally prosecute this person for their, what is in essence attempted murder.
Yeah, and obviously we don't want to jump to conclusions. The stuff is still, information is still coming in on this gentleman and his motivations. We do know in the instance with Brett Kavanaugh, it was directly connected to political that was an attempted political assassination, that was driven entirely by ideology, that the guy stated specifically that was why he was going after him, was because of his political positions or his perceived political positions surrounding his court rulings, his judge rulings. We don't know directly in this case yet, though. Of course, that does seem somewhat likely, given especially the fact that this happened at a campaign event, that kind of thing. But again, don't want to just immediately assume that's the case. But the point is that, like you said, these people seem to obviously. I'm sure the guy who directly made an attempt on the life of Brett Kavanaugh will probably see some jail time, though. Who knows that the way this is going? What we're really seeing here is the selective enforcement of the law, and that not only is it the selective enforcement of law, but very specifically in application of violence. Right, when the left utilize violence, it's not a news story, it's not a big deal. Or in the case of things like the BLM riots, the media is pro these things, politicians are cheering them on, celebrities are helping to bail them out. I mean, the now sitting vice president directly contributed and worked to bail out people who were violently burning down cities. So this is a consistent pattern of incitement to violence by the media, by left-wing politicians, by different celebrities, that type of thing. And then when actual violence against right wingers occurs, right wing candidates, Supreme Court justices, that kind of things, again, completely disappears. It never existed. Immediately memory hold. No one talks about the fact that this happens. But if people walk into the Capitol building and during a protest, they even, you could say, have a riot in the Capitol building, those people need to be basically like disappeared into a black site, without any access to like basic medical care, because they're playing for the wrong team. And if you play for the right team, then you can do what you want, and anything you do will be basically justified. It'll be removed from the public consciousness, if it was something that was over the line. But if it's something like the BLM stuff, it'll be cheered on. You'll get corporate sponsors and all that stuff. If anything vaguely similar happens on the right, obviously, you're spending a large amount of time in jail.
I mean, the 2020 summer riots kind of are the most obvious example of this, where people were literally burning cities to the ground, and burning down parts of their community, and very few people were prosecuted.
Yeah, and this is where we wanted to touch on the term anarcho-tyranny, right? So for those who don't know, this term gets thrown around a lot now. It's getting more and more mainstream, but wanted to just touch on kind of the concept for people who are new to it, or weren't super familiar with the term. I think Sam Francis coined it. Skeptical Waves. Shout out to Skeptical Waves. Check out his channel. I believe he has an essay where Sam Francis uses it for the first time, or one of the first times he uses it. But it's basically the idea that the people in charge cannot control every aspect of society. They don't really have the ability to police certain communities or certain types of violence. They don't have that stranglehold, that kind of monopoly on force entirely. But what they do have the ability to do is punish the law-abiding people who might disagree with them. So they can't actually go in and like stop riots, because A, they're politically tied to the people who are doing it. B, like punishing those people publicly would look bad optically. They know political enforce. It actually serves their purposes to use these people and their political violence to kind of scare their political opponents, right? If you'll just stop letting these people burn down my city, I'll listen to you, right? And this is and this is what an anarcho-tyranny is. It's the application of the law very selectively to punish your enemies and kind of reward your supporters, with also this additional aspect of kind of terrifying all of kind of these middle class law abiding people into following you, because at any time you can kind of like allow the mob to show up at their doorstep and burn something down, while they get punished for doing basic things like just self-defense.
And the mob gets rewarded in material goods. They get to burn things down. They get to loot stores. They get to intimidate people. They get to grind their axes against those they believe have wronged them, or are the object of the type of people that have wronged them. So they the as you say, with the selective application of law, you basically know you cannot control the mob. You've accepted that, so you just guide the mob and then silence anybody who would question the mob. And it works. That's why they do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and we saw this again with Brett Kavanaugh, right? Like right after there was an attempted assassination on Brett Kavanaugh, the left were facilitating putting protesters right back on his doorstep, even though it directly violated federal law. They encouraged it openly from the White House podium for them to be back on this guy's lawn, intimidating him, intimidating his family. And people like AOC openly bragged about how she could basically deny him any kind of special protection. She could keep him from getting additional protection for him and his family because she had the power over him. So they're actively, openly mocking their political opponents with the fact that they can kind of control this and hold this over their head. And I want to show kind of how ridiculous this is, because then today, or a couple days ago, the squad here, a couple members of the squad, AOC and Ilhan Omar, they were at this pro-abortion protest, and they were arrested in air quotes here, but you can see what happens here. Let me show this real quick. But you can see she gets taken in. I'll show it, or is it the beginning of the video? There's Omar. There's no police officer with her, and she's not actually handcuffed. There are no handcuffs there. She couldn't even get a police officer to take her around. AOC here is still not handcuffed and raises her fist because, of course, she's not actually being restrained, but was holding her hands behind. You can't see earlier in this video, she was holding her hands like she was handcuffed, and then she raises her fist because she forgets she's supposed to, not be or she forgets she's supposed to be pretending to be restrained. And then Omar here obviously doesn't even have a police officer, just walks over without any restraints at all. So these are the people who are saying, oh, we're oppressed, we're being arrested for protesting, we're being put in jail, being held by the cops for for using our rights. And these are the same people who are openly bragging about denying the protection for other members of the government. These are the people talking about how terrified they are of protesters when they came in during January 6th and that kind of thing. But they're, again, actively manipulating the government to make sure that their political enemies don't have access to the bodyguards and the protection that they do. That this is the anarcho tyranny that we're talking about.
Yeah, like any Capitol police officer in their right mind would arrest either one of them. Like they're not that dumb. Like, yeah,
Right.
I'm good. I mean, you could be eating a baby in front of me, and if you were one of those individuals, they'd probably just look the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they know not to mess with this. That's why, AOC probably had to like grab the police officer and talk him into walking her over there, in the first place. And no one will even go
Which
over
they all
and,
have their own personal security details anyway. So like this
right.
is dumb. Like they don't just wander around without personal security details.
And then so obviously the gaslighting part of this then is the the one part of that, we'll see another example here. But one part of this is obviously, again, the exhausted rhetoric over how dangerous the right is, how there's this growing danger of Christian nationalism or white nationalism, or the GOP is now becoming fascist and anti-democracy. The entire time they're facilitating political violence against their opponents. They're openly pulling back uh, uh, additional security. They're openly directing the mob towards people, ginning these people up, and then running political cover by disappearing these things from the news as soon as they happen. And the whole time the FBI is out there, investigating parents for showing up to school board meetings and protesting, right? We also see this with attempts at self-defense, right? We saw this, of course, famously with Kyle Rittenhouse and what they did to him for attempting to stop people from burning down a community. And then we also recently saw this with the shooting in Indiana at the mall, right? We have this young guy. He's only, I think, like 23 years old. He's got a legal concealed carry. And this guy goes into a mall. He starts shooting. And this young guy pulls out his concealed carry and stops this guy. And this follows right after the Uvalde shooting in the school, right? And so where people just watch police officers sit outside for like half an hour, 45 minutes doing nothing while this guy's on a shooting rampage with children. And this guy, this young guy who stops the shooter, still tragically multiple people were killed, but many, many more probably would have been if this guy had not been prepared and done what he did. And in a country where you just watch a bunch of police officers do nothing in the face of a school shooting, and this guy goes out of his way to stop like this massacre in a mall before it goes even further, he starts getting a bunch of flack. All of a sudden, people are trying to destroy his life. They're talking about, oh, well, what if he had missed? What if he hadn't been accurate? Oh, all this other stuff. Again, you just see this anarcho tyranny where the government will not stop violence. In fact, they will often encourage and facilitate violence. And any attempt for you to defend yourself from the people that often they're enabling will end up getting you in more trouble than the very people who shot at you, as we can see in the case here, with the congressman who was almost stabbed, the guy's back out on the street just a few hours later.
Yeah, it's and it's like a double whammy because they also not only with the with the selective enforcement of law and the selective enforcement by law enforcement officers of what is going to be prosecuted or what is going to be investigated. It's a double whammy for them. Not only do they not attack their supporters, like their supporters are encouraged, but on top of that, it also discredits one of the organizations that has and historically been conservative, which is law enforcement. So you get double service on this one. Like you have conservatives who no longer, or right leaning people who no longer trust law enforcement because of how they're choosing to enforce the law. And then on top of that, you're giving the green light to your mob that it's okay to commit these crimes. So it's doing double duty.
Well, and that's a good point, because on top of that, it also, just like they're doing with the military and the purges, which we'll talk about in a second with the COVID vaccination, the same thing has happened with law enforcement, right? If you are unwilling to stand down and let these mobs run roughshod over, cities, burn them down, threaten Supreme Court justices,
They'll
if
fire
you're,
you.
yeah, they'll fire you, and they'll find someone who will be okay with it, right? So these people are getting the your law enforcement officers are not being selected for competence. They're being selected for their political acumen, their willingness to go along with the program. And so you're seeing a political replacement of, like you said, a force in society that is traditionally far more conservative inside the police. You're sowing a distrust of that same police force with more conservative right-wing elements of your society, all and then obviously your which only then enables more and more the ability of that force to be turned on your political opponents, which I think is very
You're,
clearly the end goal
I
of
mean,
all of this.
you're actively creating a low trust society on purpose. Like
Yeah.
that's the goal, is to
Yes.
create a society where the established authority figures that your police officers, your military personnel, these last bastions of more conservative groups of people. I mean, they got to the teachers, and then I would argue they got to the police and the military next. And so now you've discredited these traditional pillars of society with with approximately half of your population. So now nobody trusts them,
Yeah.
and it's at that point. I here's the part, Auron, that I always get stuck on is at some point society has to continue functioning, right? That's the
Hmm.
part that I don't understand, or maybe we've talked about this a lot of times and you've always had to re-explain it to me every time. Like, no, it's the part that I don't get. Like, is the goal to be king of the ashes, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, it doesn't function eventually. Like, this is regardless of what political system you so choose to believe in, the food has to be delivered, laws have to be enforced, society has to function. The day-to-day life of society has to continue on, or you don't have anything to rule over. So I don't get it. I don't. Why are you destroying your society to rule over it?
So we're going to get more into that, because we're also going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in medical in education. So we're going to hit even more on that subject, because I think that's going to be a running theme through some of the stuff we're talking about today. But I think the thing to understand is that the structure of kind of our ruling class right now requires them to burn through this stuff. Like, they have their plan is basically acidic to kind of like natural competence hierarchies. That's where the power is generated, is the inversion of competence hierarchies, the denial of reality. No, you don't have to be a man. You can be you can be whatever you want. You can transform yourself into whatever you want. Yes, of course it doesn't matter, like, anyone can become anything in society at any time. Yeah, of course we can, we can put someone who doesn't have the ability to succeed, we can put them in a position of power as long as they parrot our political priors. All these things are essential to them, right? They're Leninist. They're taking the people who are on the bottom of society and they are putting them on the top of society, and the deal is we will keep you artificially in power if you will do our bidding. And so that's like the how their power is generated. And so they can't really stop doing that, because if they do, the ruling coalition comes apart, right? Like, we look at the left, right? You have on the left, you have highly secular atheists who don't believe in anything and are like wildly pushing like LGBT agendas, and then you have like radical Muslim elements. How do you bind those two things together? How do you take those two radically different things and put them together? Well, you offer them both power they wouldn't have if society was running the way it normally would run, right? That's the promise you make to both of those groups. The left is a coalition of power. It's a mystery cult of power. And so they need to offer this inversion to make it work. And so if they stop what they're doing, even if what they're doing is pulling the world apart, even if what they're doing is materially devolving the standard of living for the people around them and the cohesion of their society, they can't stop doing that. That's how they got their power, right? They got their power by saying, we'll break down these barriers, we'll raise you up when you are at the bottom, we'll punish the people who you think were holding you down. That's the promise they made to get where they are. They can't stop that revolution, or they lose the power that they're wielding. And so
Okay.
even if they are ruling over the ashes eventually, it's still a long slide down. America is still way better off than most countries, and they get to enjoy, think of like Brazil, right? You can live in the high-end communities with the security guards and the amenities that get delivered to you, and the riffraff can fight out in the hinterlands around you.
But okay, all right. So Brazil, fair enough. But
Yeah,
there's
it's not a
that
good
tipping point.
society.
No, but it is a society that exists. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
But they're in that crucial, let's say, transition period. And we've discussed this before, where all transition periods are inherently dangerous, right?
Mhm.
Anytime there's a shift in power, you're going to have pushback. And I'm sorry, but like there are, let's call them subject matter experts. There are certain jobs you cannot pencil whip in a society, right? Pilots have to be competent to fly their aircraft. Doctors have to be competent. Well, you can argue they just whoopsie daisy on that one and more people die. But like at some point, regardless of your political opinion, there are certain cornerstones of society that require subject matter experts, engineers, people working. You can't put a political commissar in charge of a nuclear power plant. I mean, I guess you can, and then you get Chernobyl. But there are just certain jobs that require competent people to be in them that you cannot reward to your political adherence. And that's the part that I don't get. Like, okay, fine, you want to go off and have your cute little revolution, but like the middle class glue that holds society together, is the goal just to burn it all down and then just like, well, it's just going to be a lower standard of living and it sucks to suck and life goes on. Like, is that the intent? Is like, as long as I get what I want, and like these insular communities of elites within the overall society gain more power, and so therefore that's good enough.
I forget who said it. It might have been Chesterton, but there was someone who said something effective like, every empire falls the same way. It forgets kind of like the basic lessons, right? Like they always
Sure.
like, this is a very, again, cycles of history, nothing new under the sun, right? We are a society that is full of class one uh, uh, residues of the foxes. We are ruled by foxes, and foxes are all about combinations and recombining and exploring new things and that kind of thing. And that is what entirely dominates our society. All the lions, all the class two residues, they've been more or less pushed out. That they're being pushed out of the military. Even the things that are directly martial, right? Even the things that are directly
I am, as
physical.
I'm very aware of, which blows my
Exactly.
mind to this
Yeah.
day.
Even guys like you are being pushed out of the very thing you're designed to do to make room for more foxes, more politically inline kind of servile people. And so they're hollowing out even the most basic martial institutions to fill them with more and more political chaff, right? And the reason is simple. It's because they can't imagine a scenario where they're not in power. They can't imagine a scenario where society doesn't work anymore. They've been so safe for so long. They've had the power of gods forever, and they can't imagine a scenario where the society doesn't operate. And so the only question is who's in charge of it. And so the only thing they think about is how to stay in charge. The only thing they think about is how to acquire more power, not like how society needs to actually basically run. The people who care about that are all gone. They're all pushed out. They're not there anymore. And so the only goal that exists is the acquisition and retention of power. And so these people have no understanding of what happens when like the thing actually comes apart, or they don't care because they know that to go any other direction will necessarily just kind of shatter the power they have, and that's just more important to them than anything else, because they also know there might be some cost paid, right? If they lose power, it's not just that like they hand them over to someone else. People might like want to see them in chains, right? And so we're that to that point of society where you don't just get to lose an election and then go retire to your estate, right? Like we're closer to the prescription times than the just go back to your farm times, right? And so they
Sure.
know the costs of losing power is increasingly high. So I don't think they have the option of stopping what they're doing in any scenario. They're just going to keep filling all these positions with more and more foxes, more and more people who are politically servile, until kind of things, as we see, come apart. Because I mean, you have a military background. Think of all those weapon systems and things that work in the military but are being replaced because the things need to be more complex and need to be more expensive, and you need more experts to run them, right?
Yep. No, I mean this is very accurate, right? The tooth to tail ratio in the military is constantly increasing, meaning the amount of people required to support a single warfighter. Somebody, so the for every soldier you have on the ground, let's say there used to be 10 people behind them who supports that actual combat soldier. And the tooth to tail ratio for every type of force projection, be it the aircraft for the Air Force, the soldier for the Army, the ship for the Navy, is increasing exponentially. There are constantly more and more people required on the back end to support the tip of the spear. So yes, I agree with you on that.
And it's far from just the military, right? If you look at anything at all right now, the need for managers is exploding, right? Like if you look at uh any business, if you look at anything, this is a uniform uh phenomenon that is happening across pretty much every discipline. And so I don't see them stopping. The managerial revolution is in full swing, and the only thing that can solve any situation is more and more and more managers. That's the key to everything. That's the solution every time. So um sorry, I think we have someone spamming in here in chat. I'm going to hand someone the ability to block that. Well, um do you have any examples of weapon systems that are that problem while I try to hand that off to people, like
I
how that
mean,
works?
sure. I mean, you can make, if you want like a specific example. the United States Air Force has attempted to kill the A-10 weapons platform, the A-10 attack aircraft, and so they've attempted multiple times to, what's the word I'm looking for? They've falsified the efficiency ratings of the aircraft to justify just basically getting it off the books in order to get, in essence, they were trading the entire A-10 program to get like one more squadron of F-35s. So that was like the cost to benefit ratio. So they were willing to scrap hundreds of dedicated ground attack aircraft so they could basically get 12 more F-35s, which is their new premier fighter. So yeah, I mean that's a great example of a increase in the tooth to tail ratio. They were willing to completely sink an entire program just to get a few more aircraft in their new program. So yeah, that's I would say that's a good example. I mean, we could go. The A-10 has been attempted to be dumped by the Air Force for a very long time for a lot of different reasons. It's only due to complaints from basically the Marine Corps and the Army, kind of singing its praises and vaulting its effectiveness that it's lasted as long as it has. But yeah, that's one very obvious example.
All right, absolutely. So we talked about that one here. Oh, sorry, we got so far down that rebel hole, I forgot why we got started on on.
It's
Why the systems are falling apart.
Why they're falling apart, but like
Gotcha.
my argument is always at some point, competent people, regardless of political affiliation, need to fulfill certain roles. And you're always telling me, and I get it, you're always telling me, no, they don't.
Well,
basically, I mean, they do, but not that they don't, but like basically, they're willing to sacrifice competence for party loyalty every time.
yes, though it's not that you're wrong about that, and it's not that eventually there won't be consequences. Obviously, there already are consequences, but it's that they just don't. It's just always loses out in the calculus to their power, right? Like as long as they can boil the frog slowly enough to keep kind of funneling things their direction, that's the most important thing to them, and everything else is really just secondary. But let's speaking of a figurehead that allows them to funnel everything to themselves and everything else is secondary. Let's look at Joe Biden here. So Joe Biden did something very interesting this week. He had it's another banner week for Joe Biden. And so good
Is
old
he still
Joe
the
here.
president? Like,
No, but we do pretend he
okay.
is. Yes.
Yeah, fair enough. Just checking.
All right, so let's listen to Joe here for a moment.
Off the window. That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer, and why can't for the longest time Delaware had the highest cancer rate in the nation.
So Joe Biden here, for those who didn't catch it, is Joe Biden is talking about how he has cancer. He apparently, when you're in Delaware, like oil just like flies up in the air or something and hits you in the face and gives you cancer. I believe that was the context for what he was saying there. Now, the amazing thing about Joe Biden saying this is basically immediately no one took him seriously, right? Because as Ostrakon pointed out, no one actually at this point believes Joe Biden is the president of the United States. Like he technically, inhabits the office, but everyone knows that Joe Biden doesn't actually run the United States. And whenever he says something dumb or goofy like this at this point, we're almost even done like pointing it out or trying to analyze it. We just kind of wait for the people who actually run the country to kind of like come behind him and reinterpret his words and tell us what's actually going on. Like it's the Oracle of Delphi, right? Like mumbles something and then the people who actually run the country say it. Yeah.
That's a really sad and accurate description of what the president is.
Yeah, it's just like
it's like well, it's like what did he say? He said that we're going to open up trade with China.
Yeah.
Sure? No, we're not. But like this is what we're going with today.
Right.
Listen, it was on the agenda. Like we needed to do this. It was on the list of things that we decided was like a hot topic this week. So we're just going to roll with it.
Yeah, the press secretary has like things that are happening, and it doesn't matter what Joe Biden actually said. The press secretary is still going to read out the things that were supposed to have been said and kind of just pretend that's what happened. So after this, we find out that Joe Biden does not, at least to our knowledge, have cancer. However, the next day, the White House did announce that he does have COVID, which is interesting because, of course, Joe Biden publicly received like every vaccine and booster available. And this means that both Joe Biden and Anthony Fauci received like every possible injection you could, the ones that were supposed to be life-saving, the ones that are supposed to prevent everything, the ones that are supposed to do all this stuff, and they both got COVID. The two arguably most vaccinated, most protected human beings, the ones that are directing the response and are supposed to be instructing tens and hundreds of millions of Americans on how to avoid this deadly virus, ended up getting it after following all of their own advice. And these are the same people who are still firing people from the military. Like we were just talking about, they're still purging the military of people who refuse to get this vaccine, which very clearly seems to have almost no effect on on this pandemic. And so I have to be careful because I still don't know at this point what YouTube is censoring. Like that's the weird, amazing thing is even though it's very clear what the efficacy of this treatment is, and it's very clear what's going on, like you just still have to be very careful about what you say because even though it's very obvious to everyone what's happening here, literally you could just get nuked from orbit for just saying the obvious. So we have to be very careful with our language, especially on YouTube and Twitter. Like I don't even tweet about it that much because just you never know. Like the Twitter just decides what you said was misinformation, and you'll just get destroyed, even though like the obvious is being displayed in front of you here. So so Joe Biden does not have cancer, but he does have COVID, which is almost as deadly to people his age at this point. Unfortunately, tragically. For a lot of people have obviously lost a lot of people his age due to COVID. And so you have this scenario where the president of the United States, who clearly like just never knows where he is also has this disease that he wasn't able to prevent by taking a treatment he was requiring of soldiers and people like I think the airline the flight controllers are also having to take it and refusing to take it, and that's why like so many flights are delayed is because they're understaffed due to this. So we're literally just destroying the American economy and the American ability, the ability of our military to defend us and all these different things over something that even the president of the United States takes and then just still gets the disease anyway.
I just have to laugh at one of the comments in chat. It's by Steve, and it says, "What's next? Lunch with Melissa, sir." And then the next part is launch the missiles. Sure. As well done, Steve.
Yeah,
I just like that.
Yeah, no, we really are in that scenario at any time, which is, people made the same Trump, and it, begs the can't elect any like under the age of maybe, I don't know, 70 at some point. Is that even an option? Apparently not. But yeah, no, it is terrifying that it's that easy for these people to just prop him up and use him to run the country. But it's also, I think, tells you kind of what the purpose of these mandates were. It very clearly kind of never about protecting people, and it was very obviously about seeing how much control you could exert, seeing how much you could punish your political enemies, and seeing how much you could purge core institutions, especially ones like the military, of people who might have problems with your political project.
I mean, look what it's created. It's created people, I guess, kind of like me who, don't know anything but military service, but are no longer welcome in the military. And you've created a mercenary class, which is insane to think that in this modern day and age that we have this. But it's true, like, right? Like that's just blows my mind that this exists as part of part of the United States government, where you've got the defense industrial complex is in essence the modern day mercenaries for the U.S. political for the U.S. empire. But
Absolutely.
you could totally just say military industrial complex equals mercenaries, and this would be kind of fairly. It's weird though. It's not just mercenaries though. It's like it's like the German officers taking over the Roman military, or the group of not Scythians. Oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank. North of Greece.
History
The
nerds are screaming at you in chat.
I
right now.
know. Oh god, I can do this. Hold on, you talk. Give me 2 seconds.
But yeah, no, it is. A lot of people will be cynical and they'll say, oh, well, it was always like this, right? The military, the police, they were always just going to follow whoever. They were always just in it for the money. And obviously, like, people have to get paid. Compensation is always an issue. Again, you don't need a lot of historical examples to look at, different Roman generals and, the people who would follow them. It really just depended on, a lot, sometimes how much money they had. But also there's
Thracians, by the way, is what I was looking for.
The Thracians.
When you had the Thracian generals within they weren't actually within the Roman military, but they became part of it. And it was just this very bizarre where they've exported their actual war fighting capabilities to people who were not Roman. I know that obviously happened throughout the empire, but like when their leadership positions started to no longer be Roman as well. It just, yes, I feel this is very much true to this day, where, as I've discussed previously with you, like for certain things when it comes to force projection outside the United States, you still have to have competent people in charge, but they can't be part of the political system anymore because that won't fly with your supporters. So the way they get around that is by using, private contractors from within the military industrial complex to fulfill that role of competent people that then they can immediately get rid of at any time if they disagree with them.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I think that's, we're only going to see that grow. Right. And so it's really unnerving to know that, that's the direction you're heading. But again,
I've started a war in chat. I'm so sorry, guys. That's like, no, it wasn't these guys. It was the Hungarians. It's the Thracians. Guys, just don't do this.
What's the bit from Life of Brian? Like, no, we're the People's Liberation Army. No, we're the Army Liberation of the People's Front. Like,
what happened to the Popular Front? Yeah, he's over there.
Right.
I guess the point I'm trying to make, guys, is just basically exporting your actual war fighters to be military contractors. But anyway, we're getting off in rabbit holes here. I apologize. Let's get back on track or on what they're actually talking about.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's still a good point. I mean, it's like every manual of war, right? Don't hire all mercenary armies, right? Like don't trust an all mercenary army is like one of the basic.
It's a good policy.
Yeah, it's one of the basic manual of war things. It's just, you need people who are actually loyal to you at the key positions of power. It doesn't mean you can't have auxiliaries. It doesn't mean you can't have mercenaries, but if they make up, an increasingly large amount of your fighting force, again, this is just a recipe throughout history for disaster, and it always turns out this way. We are not escaping the cycle of history. We are living through it. Nothing new under the sun there. All right. So one more subject before we start hitting those super chats, because I see them piling up. So we had a story come out just today as well about let me bring it up, about the DEI. And for those who are not familiar, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. The DEI curriculum now is going to be applied in... Why is this not showing up? There it is. Okay. Is going to be applied increasingly in medical schools. So obviously we know that, colleges in general have been incredibly woke, and the entrance to colleges is incredibly political. It's very, very much based, especially on these diversity requirements. They actively reduce the number of like Asian and white students so that they include other groups. They actively, increase the standards for those entries and reduce the standards of others. And obviously, the things taught in colleges are far more woke often than anything else. But there's this idea, right, when all of this really got very loud about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago on college campuses with the wokeness, this kind of extreme social justice stuff, that this was all going to be temporary, right? This was kind of the boomer interpretation of this. Well, we were radical, when we were young in college, and then we got over it, even though they didn't, but we can get into that in a second. But we were radical when we were young, and then we got over it because we got jobs and we had to deal with the real world. And as soon as these kids in college get done, they go out into the real world, all this stuff will kind of disappear, right? That was the storyline, is once this ridiculous ideology makes contact with the real world, it's all just fashion, it's all just campus radicalism, and it'll disappear once these people actually enter the workforce. But that's not what happened at all. Instead, actually, this ideology conquered the world. And there's also this idea that this would be confined to the soft sciences, right? It would be in sociology or political science, or it would be in your English lit classes. But there would be a barrier, right? There would be a hard barrier between that, all the kind of the soft, squishy stuff in college, and then the hard sciences, and we would not apply it there. But that's obviously not true, right? Of course, we're seeing now people it used to be the argument is, well, you can change your gender, at any time, but now people are openly saying, well, just the concept of biological sex is like anti-trans, it's transphobic, that kind of thing. Like just the basic science of human anatomy is hateful, right? And now this is being applied directly into medical college. We're seeing entire changeover in medical curriculum, and they're centering it on ideas like intersectionality and the dangers of white supremacy and microaggressions, and all this stuff is now going to be applied very directly in all of your medical classes. So now these hard sciences are going to be just as infiltrated with this ideology at every level as the soft stuff. HR managers aren't just going to run your hiring, they're going to run like your medical decisions and how your doctors are educated. And obviously, Ostrakon, you were saying earlier, how can society continue to function this way? What happens when all your doctors are selected for their political priors instead of like their ability to do open heart surgery?
I mean, again, a lot of even within medicine, a lot of the softer aspects of medicine, your psychiatry, your things that your psychology and psychiatry sciences, those are easy to change, right? Because all you got to do is just update a few books and basically say what was once a medical or once was a psychological or ailment is no longer, because it was gender dysmorphia, right? It used to be a thing as far as what's the big the DSM?
DSM-5.
No.
Yeah,
the DSM, right? So gender dysmorphia used to be considered a medical condition under the DSM, and now they just update it, and now it's no longer considered something that's different. So that was easy to change because that's just a few words in a book. But at some point, like you said, like your open heart surgeons and your like orthopedic surgeons, regardless of their political affiliation, they need to be able to learn, how to properly, cut bone and perform heart surgery based upon the medical gender, the actual sex of the individual involved, because there's you're going to have different requirements based upon what sex the individual is you're performing surgery on. So what happens when you completely abolish the concept of what sex you are, or it just, this person identifies as a man, so we're going to give them treatment based upon the fact that they identify as a man, and that could potentially kill them against all good medical science. So the insanity is never ending. And if they die at that point, I really just think they believe, well, things happen and they did the best they could. And based upon the information that was provided, this is all we can provide for them. Or we'll be at the point eventually where doctors will not even know the difference or not even understand the concept of the difference between, male and female sex. And so therefore, they will just be incompetent and accidentally kill people because they're more afraid of losing face with the political party than they are at actually performing their functions as surgeons.
Yeah, and people, that might sound crazy to people. People might be like, "We'll come on, we'll never get there. Like, we'll never like lose the ability to do basics.
Well, I'm saying
biology."
it's not even the doctors are in denial. It's the doctors won't understand the
Yeah,
concept of the two genders or the two sexes, whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? Man and woman.
yeah, and I think you're right. Like, as insane that sounds to people, like I think that's a real thing that can happen because Oswald Spengler said that eventually he predicted that we would walk away from science, right? And he said the reason that the West will eventually just abandon science is that the exact like understanding of these facts is just too much. It's too much control, it's too much power, it's too much certitude, it's too constricting. It restricts the ability of people to make decisions, and eventually you'll have to find a way to break out. And he actually predicted that the way it would happen is that people would just kind of abandon these pursuits, right? Like, we think of science as like something, once it's discovered, it's just there, right? Like, once science has been done, then it's a fact and it exists in perpetuity forever. It's been discovered, or the invention's been made, the fact has been uncovered, and now it's just a fact of the universe, and it exists in perpetuity. But that's not what science is. Science is a tradition, and if it's not practiced, if the knowledge isn't handed down from one generation to the next, if the high tier minds of your society don't spend their time practicing and perfecting their ability to execute that stuff and to keep those rigorous standards up, then it just falls away. And yeah, like, the knowledge exists out there somewhere, but you lose it, right? Think of, this is why, kind of the idea of the fall of the Romans and the loss of many of the philosophical and scientific and other advances of kind of antiquity fell away, right? Because those things were pushed into monasteries or pushed east, and they were no longer practiced in the West, and that technology and that generational knowledge just collapses. And so while it might sound ridiculous to us that like we could lose the ability to practice medicine because like people just no longer believe in a gender binary or a sex binary, that isn't as crazy as it sounds. Like, as each generation is required to pretend more and more that this isn't a real thing, I think it very much can happen, and we're already seeing it again in kind of our inability to maintain our civilization at this point, our inability to maintain different systems, right? We're losing mechanical ability because, again, we're losing those lions, we're losing those people who are kind of the class twos who were always out there kind of holding things together physically, and so we don't have the ability to repair certain systems and make infrastructure operate. And so we're losing that across many different domains, the military included. It's not crazy to think that science would be when, again, selecting them for the ability to pare back political pride.
I mean, when I go to the doctor, if they're under the age of like 50, I usually find a new doctor. Like I prefer my doctors to be crusty old men. Like, that's just me personally. But they honestly, like, they haven't steered me wrong yet. And it's simply because they're too tired and too old to be anything but truthful, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like, they've seen it all too long. They're just like grizzled war veterans at that point. Like, give me an old Navy doc any day of the week and I'll be a happy man. Like, it's like, no, yeah, we'll take care of this. It's like, no, this is dumb. This is the way we're going to be doing it. But there's some, apart from me being funny, there's some real logic to that. Like, I want to have a doctor who's going to offer me a medical opinion that isn't concerned with how I feel about the medical opinion. I just want to know the facts of, like, how my body is functioning. And you get this with younger doctors where they seem far more concerned about how I'm going to react to the information versus actually just telling me what's wrong with me. And that's kind of all kind of tied together with this.
Yeah, because now they're not just worried about your feelings; they're worried about losing their medical license because they called you a man because you happen to have like a penis,
Versus the 70-year-old doctor is like, what are they going to do to me? Like, I
Right.
don't care.
Yeah.
I'm angry and old. It's like,
Yeah.
yes, you're the man I want to listen to.
Yeah. All right, so we'll go ahead and start with our super chats, guys. If you have a question for myself or Ostrakon, you can go ahead and throw that up there. We've already got quite a few, so we want to go ahead and get started. Thank you very much, everybody. Let's go with Richie W here for 10 euros. He says, "Thank you, Auron. Your Twitter feed is the best." Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Obviously, a lot of people know me more from Twitter than anything else. I really appreciate you guys coming by. I'm seeing more and more people make the leap from Twitter to the kind of these streams and stuff. So I really appreciate it. Also, for those who missed it, I was just recently on Steve Deese over on the Blaze. I'm trying to get better about letting people know when I do appearances on other stuff. So we might be getting some more people over. So again, if we go over some concepts you've heard of before, do forgive me. We're trying to catch up some people who may not have been familiar with the channel previously.
Not everyone's been here since the beginning. So
Yeah.
for those of you who are old hands, we're trying to initiate the new people. So if it sounds like we've had this discussion before, Auron, where it sounds like sometimes we're repeating ourselves and what we talk about, or we're rehashing the same information over and over again. I agree with you in that there's value in that, in the sense that with the growing audience, there are people who don't necessarily aren't all on the same page. And as a result, we need to keep pointing out the same things over and over again, even if it just seems like old news to us.
Yeah, but trying not to fall into the old rut of just noticing and going, oh, the hypocrisy and stuff. But yeah, there are a lot of people who are just entering this space and aren't familiar with the terminology or kind of the different ideas, and we don't want to just throw a bunch of jargon at them and have them get lost as we kind of get to deeper waters. So bear with us as we move forward. Richie W again, thank you very much, sir. They are laying the foundation of the coming nightmare. My friends all think I'm mad or I'm exaggerating how bad it is. And yeah, man, I mean, we get a lot of that, but at the same time, just think at how insanely things have advanced, right? Like, again, tell anyone, even though like, the most ardent opponents of something like gay marriage from like 12 years ago, that we'd have people trying to push puberty blockers and aggressive surgery on 8 or 10 or 12-year-olds, and that this would be taught in like every school, and this stuff would be mixed into your medical schools, and it would be in all of your entertainment, and everything you do would be opened with this stuff. They would think you're insane, right? They think you're a crazy person, but here we are, we're all living through it. Like, tell them that the government would just let people burn cities in the United States for weeks on end in the middle of a pandemic, and just because it's helps their political situation. Again, most people wouldn't have believed you, but here we are. Though again, there is some historical precedent in that in the 60s. But the point being is, yeah, it can be easy for people to kind of pretend like, oh no, really, this stuff's not happening. But obviously, we see, especially as this just continues to accelerate, you're a fool, to kind of throw these predictions by the wayside. Alex Jones isn't right over and over again because he's some kind of prophet or has the ability to see the future. He just says the craziest stuff you can imagine, and that just puts him way ahead of the curve at this point.
I mean, we did the same thing when we were talking years ago about the politicization of the military.
Mm-hmm.
And then a year later all the articles come out, and then everyone's like, oh my god, Auron, how did you figure this out? It's just like, well, we always were talking about this. Is like, if you just follow and connect the dots, this isn't like secret information. It's just, this is the culmination of the the plan for the last 25 years, and it's just come to fruition finally.
Absolutely. All right. So, Pete Budapest for $20. Thank you very much, Pete. He says GOP are incapable of standing up for themselves. Steve Scalise never makes a peep about how radicalized the Dems nearly killed him are. And Brian Mast lost both legs overseas and was still almost mobbed by Antifa outside the White House. Yeah, Pete. I mean, it's insane. The Republicans don't they don't know. They either, some of them don't know how to fight, some of them don't care, right? And it's always a mix. There are those that genuinely just they're trying to have a certain level of decorum. They're trying not to be victims, that they and so they hold back kind of this stuff. But at the same time, that hurts them because they're not on the attack. And that's always the problem with the GOP. They're always on defense. They're never on attacks. Again, some of that is they do that on purpose. There are many people in the GOP who are actively controlled opposition, and they know their job is to do the Washington Generals thing. But at the same time, there are also people who are just structurally don't understand why they can't win. They don't understand that because they don't have the media outlets, because they don't have the educational institutions, they don't have the ability to keep that message forefront in the way that the Dems do. Republicans simply couldn't drive a media cycle the way the left does if they wanted to, and most of the time they don't want to anyway. So I think it's a failure on many levels, and I don't see most of them learning this lesson. There are a few up and coming ones who kind of have the right idea. They're learning a little more. Eventually, they're going to have to learn if we want to get anywhere. But again, I'm not really very optimistic on the GOP as kind of becoming this vehicle of change that many people hope it will be. Let's see. Pete again for $5. Thank you, Pete. Both Scalise and Mass tripped over themselves to say how they were how they valued free speech and expression after they were violently attacked and were almost killed. Yeah, again, Pete, I think this is people they're thinking that if they can just show that they're the ones who have the real principles, right? If they're the real men of principle, if they're the ones who really stand for what the country is supposed to stand for, then people will rally behind them. And I wish that was true, but it becomes very clear at some point that it isn't, right? And so
this is not the age of principles. This is the age of power.
Well, they're trying to appeal to a shared ethic that doesn't exist, especially with the left, right? You still have a lot of people on the right who believe in it, and you still have some people who were on the left, again, kind of those Dave Rubins or Sam Harris's, or those kind of people, Glenn Greenwald's, who kind of bought the idea that these were the values of the left, even though they were abandoned them, and they kind of moved to the center. But that's all that's left. The people on the actual left at this point, they're not on board with this. They all believe that it's far more important to imprison your political enemies and threaten people and put mobs on people's doorsteps than they believe in free speech. Like they're willing to run show trials at this point. They literally took trials and put them in prime time and hired TV producers to put them on so that they can publicly punish their political opponents. These are not people who are interested in free speech. Like that's all there is to it, and they're not going to be. And you're not going to shame them into it by showing how brave you are by supporting it when people try to mob you.
So here's a question, Auron, regarding this: is how disconnected is the Republican Party to still believe that this is a naked power grab? Like that's the part I don't get. Like how can they? Is it just this? That's their role, or it's the point where just they're in such denial of the situation that's all they can cling to?
I think there's a mix of that. So I think you have your people, especially the more ensconced, entrenched powers in the GOP, understand their role. They know they're the Washington Generals. They know that they're never going to hold the top slot, but they can still make themselves a very nice living and line their pockets and get invited to the right cocktail parties, as long as they kind of effectively manage the decline of their side and the middle America and the people who rely on them. And then I think there are people who understand the game a little better, have more sincere convictions, but just know that they can't actually, mount a real opposition. And so they kind of just go along to get along, even though they don't like the situation. And then I think you have the more up and comers, the real true believers, the firebrand people, and they just don't understand how the game is rigged against them. They don't know where else to go and how else to change these things. Some of them are looking other directions. Some of them are interacting with people like us and others who I think are giving them better advice, but they're still trapped in a losing game, and that's a really difficult thing to understand. You breaking frame is incredibly difficult. It's a very effective thing for the left. It's worked for them for many years. It's going to continue to work for a while, even though they're stretching it to its limits as much as possible. I think it's still very difficult to explain, especially to kind of your 60s and 70s people in their 60s and 70s who have voted GOP their whole life or most of their life, that these people aren't going to fight for you. They're absolutely not going to put themselves out there, and they're absolutely not actually fighting for the things you want them to fight for. And even the things that they've convinced you are worth fighting for are the wrong things. I think that's just a generational problem that will kind of go away in the next 10 years in some respects. But then you have a whole nother host of issues, I think, on your doorstep.
Makes sense to me.
So let's check in with Glow in the Dark here for $10. Thank you very much. The selective enforcement law has multiple effects, it seems. Number one, it causes division the elites can use. Absolutely. 2, teaching helplessness to the citizens. Yep, absolutely. 3, it creates a caste system. Yep, that's where the not hypocrisy, but hierarchy thing comes in. And then number 4, it empowers politicians. And yeah, that's exactly right. You've got a number of different things that it does for you. It allows them to create this caste system. It allows them to punish their enemies, reward their friends. It teaches the population that there's nothing they can do. They're helpless in front of these people. If you try to defend yourself, if you try to get your community together, it's going to backfire on you. You'll be destroyed personally. The only thing you can try to do is get more political favors from the ruling class. And then obviously that grants more power to the politicians. The only thing is, of course, as Ostrakon has pointed out many times, you are playing with fire because you are trading the social fabric of your society. You are dissolving the high trust society in favor of power. And that seems like a winning formula for a while when there's a lot of trust and a lot of power to grab by breaking it down. But eventually you hit this inversion where your states become unlivable, right? And you can't, no one wants to live in California because they don't want, who wants to operate a business in a state where you can shoplift with 0 penalties? Who wants to live in New York where someone can attempt to stab a congressman and they can be out on the street the next day, right? And so you start seeing eventually these things do have costs, but they are far down the road for most politicians. And people kind of, again, the frog gets boiled slowly. That people forget that, oh, there was a time, like when I was a kid, you could ride your bike outside, like you all day, like you walked outside and you rode your bike until the sun went down a lot of days of the summer, and no one thought about your safety. I would ride many, many blocks all across my neighborhood, across busy streets and down to other things, parts of the city, go buy things. And it wasn't a big deal because like there was just a high trust society where that was safe and that was understandable. And now the idea of that will get you arrested. People will literally call like child protective services on you if you let your kids do that. So there's this loss of trust in society, and people forget that there was ever this other time where people lived a different way. And in the meantime, there's a lot of power these politicians can accrue to themselves while trading, that quality of life for the effects you're describing there, Glow in the Dark. Let's see. Got another one. Glow in the Dark. As you again, the selective enforcement of laws. Oh no, same one. Hold on, it didn't switch to the other one. There we go. All right. It says, I think the elite are betting on globalism to act as a safety net. If the farmers in this country revolt, you can get 100 farmers from Africa to do it. And yeah, I think they were planning on that, Glow in the Dark. I think you're right that was a that was their plan. But obviously, we're starting to see that fall apart, right? One of the things that they were banking on is that globalism would just always function in the background. You could always stretch these costs to the edge. You could always do this just in time delivery. You can operate your economy at the slimmest of margins and squeeze the maximum efficiency because you are always going to have the supply chain. And now they started pushing this also with the restrictions. We're seeing many different places, like in the Netherlands, Italy, Sri Lanka. Farmers are having these huge problems because they're applying these globalist restrictions to fertilizer and methane output and all these other things, saying that the farms are hurting the environment. And then they're also doing things like shutting off Russia, right? Like you're having a war between Russia and Ukraine, and they're shutting down all commerce. And so they're doing things that again just stretch those supply chains to their very limits, and shut down the ability of kind of the global supply chain and that just-in-time delivery to work. The reliability is falling apart. So I think they were expecting globalism to always allow them infinite redundancy, right? You always had a labor pool somewhere else. You could always ship the grain in from somewhere else. But the more they stress the system, the more it falls apart. And once you're like relying on African farmers in volatile climates and political situations to load up ships and send them across the ocean and feed your people so they don't like tear you apart from like famine riots, I think you're running things really close to the red line. Let's see here. Did I lose you, Ostrakon? Are you still with me?
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Listening. It's what you're talking about. I couldn't help but laugh because it just felt like you were a spoken word version of an REM song right there.
It starts with birds and planes.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes airplanes.
Yeah, it's it's I am being an active participant in the audience at this point.
No problem. I just wanted to make sure
I have no further comment because I agree with everything you just said. Like, yes, I agree.
No problem. All right.
Yeah.
Our next one here, Richie W again says, Kendi is the perfect example, clearly plucked from obscurity because he's a dull boy. They pick a lot of BN, I guess.
What's BN?
I'm think he's saying black women intellectuals for how insufferable they are. They want to incite hatred. I mean, yeah, obviously we have a lot of people who are being thrust into these, and it's obviously you have Robin DiAngelo, who I believe is as white as they get, who's doing the same thing, right? They have a lot of people who obviously are not the brightest bulbs being elevated and being praised as these high tier intellectuals because they're willing to lecture people on the evil of their whiteness or the terrible historical injustice of their past, these kind of things. And it does cause resentment from a lot of people, understandably so, right? And so I think that there are a lot of people who are being chosen particularly for those traits. And of course that gets even again more dangerous when we're not just talking about your ability to like lecture people on diversity, equity, inclusion, but when you're actively like including those diversity requirements into your selection of people for really high tier competency positions. Everyone wants the person who is operating on them to be doing it because they are very good at their job, right? Everybody wants that. They don't want them chosen because of their ability to fill in a number of diversity checkboxes or to be able to parrot back a particular line of social justice reasoning. And so that only gets more and more dangerous as it gets further and further into kind of those key pillars of society, like our military and our medical and all those other things. Let's see.
I mean, that's always my argument. It's just the trains still have to run on time, regardless of what political system you're in.
And if you push it far enough, you're probably not going to like the people who get selected to run the trains on time again.
Exactly.
Yeah, something you really want to be careful with. So Glow in the Dark again for $5. Thank you very much for your donation. Managerial elite, more laws equals more freedom. So more managers equals better management. This explains why regulations and institutions keep expanding. Yes, it's part of their class interest. It's how their power gets expanded, right? If you're able to increase the reliance, if you're able to increase the level of complexity and the required amount of management at each level, then you empower the managers and the people who support and teach them and that kind of thing. This is also really important when it comes to law, because more and more we see the managerial elite getting injected into the legal sphere, right? The managers or people who are part of the managerial class are essential to winning legal cases. You need the right experts. You need the right expert witnesses to deliver their opinions on the science of something or the psychology of something or the economics of something. And all of these people are essential to you winning those cases. You also see more and more law falling into this managerial realm where the cases are decided more on their impact on like the efficiency of the managerial regime than on their actual legal efficacy. And so I think you're right, Glow in the Dark, that's why we're going to kind of just see that continue to expand. I don't think that's a trend we're going to be turning around anytime soon. All right, hunting down the rest of our super chats. We've still got a few left here. Sorry, guys. That was the last one from Glow in the Dark. Where are these things? You spaced them out too much on me. I've got to go hunting.
Please stand by. Your podcast will resume momentarily.
All right. So the next one, Connor O'Hare for $5. Thank you for your donation, Connor. How successful do you think the WF will be with brain chips? I mean, yeah, we see these stories come out more and more, right? We see these come out every day. Oh, we're just going to put a chip in your brain, or we're going to put a chip in your hand for payment, those kind of things. All that kind of stuff. Obviously, this harkens back to the mark of the beast. It's terrifying. And also, when you start implanting things in people's brains, you feel the need, you understand the call for Butlerian jihad, right? Like it starts to make a lot more sense. And that's kind of one of the difficulties that we run into is right now, the managerial regime is very closely interwoven with technology, right? We have a hard time separating those two things. Can we even have this high level of technological advancement without the managerial class? And for a lot of people, the answer is no. And if we can't find a way to decouple those things, then that means that technological advancement and the continuation of the managerial regime will be synonymous. They're going to be one and the same. And so that's a real, again, these are very big problems that I don't think most like politicians and stuff are struggling with, is that the very idea that a lot of your society is built on, of this perpetual technological progress, is also the key that is enabling your political enemies to maintain power and dissolve most of the high trust stuff in your society. Like these are all part of the same thing. And the question is, can you decouple these things? Can we continue to see the technology work the way it's working, or in a different manner without the managers? Or are these always going to be the same thing? Are those always spheres that are completely overlapping? Or is there a way to unshackle them from each other? And until we can answer that question, then it seems like there will always be infinite success, but with like these brain chips things, right? Because like the ability of these managers to increase technology is part of their draw, and the technology enabling the managers is part of that draw. So they are very closely linked.
My whole argument when it comes to the brain chips is we don't need brain chips. Like it's called cell phones. It's we already carry our own brain chips with us all the time. I know it's a bit of a joke, but like seriously, like we all have cell phones on us all the time with cameras and microphones. Like brain chips are not required.
We've already made the Panopticon. We've already created the tracking software,
we've already created the tracking. Yeah, exactly. You just said it. Like we don't need a chip in our hands to pay for things when we use a chip in our phone to pay for things.
You already pay handsomely for your brain chip on a
Yeah,
usually you
exactly.
finance it. Yeah.
Like, near field communication is already a thing. So like, you use your cell phone to make purchases. The brain trip is not required.
All right, our next one here for Bella Phosphorus Knight, $10. Thank you very much. He says, "What are the chances in where it is more boomer power grab? Make further. I don't think English is his first language, but I'll do my best to translate here. Make further generations useless to make them unretirable. I hate the boomers. Also, I saw a California plate. My day is ruined, and I had violent thoughts." Yeah, I mean, all of us hate to see Californians moving into your state. Remember, border control, border security begins at the California border. You have to stop California and New York from jettisoning all their poisonous lot into other states before anything else. But obviously there's a lot of issues with the boomer generation, right? We saw the boomer generation trade in a lot of their children's future to kind of continue to hold on to power. The the idea of passing on things took a big hit under the boomer generation. And so there's a huge, you can lay a lot of blame there at if you want, and a lot of it is justifiable. But obviously, like the generations coming up now are going to be in just as much of kind of a problem here. We can blame people as much as we want, but unfortunately, even if it's 100% true, it doesn't solve our problem, right? It doesn't mean that we shouldn't recognize the mistakes that those generations have made and learn from them. But it's very difficult, right? Like one of the things, and interesting that you use this phrase, make generations unretirable. It's an interesting thing. I don't know if it's exactly how you meant it, but that's one of the things the boomers did is they made it so that they never passed power and wealth and things to the next generation. They held on to it as long as possible. That's why we still have like Joe Biden's and Donald Trump's as president. They, instead of becoming like elder statesmen who counseled the young who actually ran the country, they just held on, with both hands, grasping desperately to power. The good news is that some of that's going to solve itself just by the passage of time here soon. But it is an issue. Will other generations do the same thing? The answer is probably yes, because I don't think the Gen X or millennials or Zoomers will have any more loyalty to the generations coming after them than Gen X did, until there's a very different way people think about kind of continuity of civilization. Like we have this thing in our society where we pit men against women and children against their parents and one generation against the next, instead of seeing ourselves as this chain of being, this continuity of our civilization. Because we don't have this binding culture and tradition and kind of spirit, we always are creating this war between groups that are like essential for us to function. So like the old need the young, and the young need the old, and men need women, and women need men. And rather than understanding that and working together and moving towards something that's better for everyone, we pit ourselves against, and we factionalize and say, well, men had their run and now women need to have it. Or, men are down on their luck, and so they have to, put women back into their place to reassert their dominance. Or, boomers had their run and now they need to get out of the way. Like, instead of looking towards what's best for the totality of society and the continuation of the tradition and the civilization, we factionalize across like essential lines of people who need to share and work together to make things happen. And that's devastating. And so while I think you have a lot of good points there, I think we got to find a way to heal these divides, because if we don't, I don't think we're going anywhere, or at least nowhere good. Let's see. Heath here for $5. The boomer came the I mean, that's very true. Again, Heath, in a lot of ways, I think you're touching on much about what we just talked there. The boomers, the radicals became the college professors. You can even see this directly, like members of the Weather Underground, a terrorist organization that planted bombs and tried to kill people, became college professors, right? And they became central to this. And the whole time they kept this myth of fighting against the power. And we see how desperate they are to hold on to this. Because again, we saw like AOC and Ilhan Omar pretending like they were oppressed and being arrested when they were obviously like not even handcuffed. So there's this victimhood narrative and this need to like not be part of the system, but also like wanting to naturally rise to power and kind of have those benefits. I think again we've got to break that cycle. We've got to break that expectation, that cultural expectation of how people approach the establishment and power and those kind of things, if we're going to make any progress, because what we have now is just absolutely poisonous. Michael Robinson for $10. Thank you very much for your donation, Michael. Michael says, "What up, my hobbits?" Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, we had that Mencius Molebug essay, right? There was a lot of controversy over that. I did a stream that I think worked out really well with Pedro Gonzalez talking about it, and then the Distributus just did a stream about this subject as well, and he's always got a lot of good insights. So if you didn't catch either of those streams and you don't know what Michael's talking about, you can check those out and catch up a little bit. But yes, always. Sorry.
No, it's just I feel like Mencius Molebug falls into the same category as Ayn Rand, is a very good person to diagnose problems but not provide solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think you might be onto something there with that comparison.
Like, it's really good at identifying what the problems are, really bad at providing solutions to those problems.
Yeah, Yarvin, I mean, as we've said a million times, we'll just say it one more time for everybody. Yarvin is the master of systems analysis. He's very good at understanding how power works. He's very good at laying it out. He's very good at all of that. He's very good at seeing through your plans with dealing with power. He's very good at shooting them full of holes. And by the way, that's a talent I have too, because it's much easier to critique than it is to build. It's a trap we all fall into. So it's not just Yarvin, it's all of us, right? It's much easier to do that. Yeah.
But it won't kick you. It won't get you kicked off YouTube.
That's also true. It's much safer to assess problems than solutions in that manner as well. But I do think that I do think that's a fair point, Ostrakon. I do think that's a good way of looking at it. All right, Richie W again for €5. Thank you very much again, sir. Why don't you and Lindsay get on? It always makes me sad to see you guys fighting. So here's the thing. For those who are not familiar with the James Lindsay deep lore, I do not like drama. This is not something I'm a big fan of. I tend to ignore it when people try to call me out on Twitter or make a problem of something. We've got too many enemies. We've got too much going on. The battle is already uphill, and we just it's not how I like to spend my time. Build something, say something interesting. There's a lot to be done with drama. You can get a lot of attention. You can build entire very successful YouTube channels and Twitters and stuff on drama, but I just don't find it very compelling, and it's not something I dedicate a lot of time to. But what happened with Lindsay, to just give like the short story, is Lindsay draws a lot of concepts from things that are NRX adjacent, right? But he spent a lot of time. He used to do a lot more of it beforehand. He did, and he goes back to it now occasionally. He spent a lot of time dunking on people who are like neo-reactionaries or postmodern traditionalists or whatever he wants to call it. He kind of mixes it up, saying like, you have to watch out for these people. They're dangerous. You can't let them be right. You can't listen to them, even though he's basically parroting back a lot of this stuff. And at some point, it seems like he was even lifting some of it, not from me, to be very clear, but from other thinkers without crediting them. So he's like always had this chip on his shoulder. And then at some point, he decided to just for no reason go after Alex Kashuda, who I'm friendly with. And all I said to James Lindsay was, I just used the James Burnham quote. I just, liberalism is the ideology of suicide of a culture, whatever it is. And he blocked me, and I just kind of moved on from there. And every once in a while, I guess like someone would screenshot him something and he would like unblock me, retweet what I said, spurg out about it, and then block me again. And he just did that on a consistent basis, and he apparently has continued to do so. Obviously, James Lindsay and I agree on a number of things. It would be nice if that was the focus, but I'm not going to go out of my way to like try to build bridges with a guy who goes out of his way to just fling crap every time he gets the option. I hope he's successful at the points where he's fighting against wokeness. I hope people can see through the points at which he has like shallow and obvious critiques, especially when it comes to like his like Reddit tier new atheism stuff. But again, there's too much to do to focus on that stuff. Again, once every couple months he like unblocks me for a moment and then retweets something and then whines about it and then goes back to whatever he's doing. I know he just got blocked for using, or he just got banned off Twitter for using groomer. Apparently, obviously that's ridiculous. No matter how I feel about Lindsay, like he's of course 100% right about his critique of the sexualization of children, and so for that alone, he deserves credit and is fighting the good fight on that front. Even if he's wrong about the origins of it in some ways, he is at least fighting against the right enemy there. And the fact that Twitter banned him is absolutely insane. And that just should remind everybody yet again that like you should be following all your favorite people, content creators, commentators, all this stuff on other platforms, because you never know when we're going to disappear. Make sure you're going to Odyssey. Make sure you're going to Gab. Make sure you're going to these other places where you can stay in contact with people, because at any moment Twitter could just decide, or you could just decide, we've changed our terms of service, blah, you're gone, and that's that. So, I hope he gets back on, if only because he's fighting the right people on that front. I think I got everybody here at this point. Let me just double check, make sure I haven't missed everything. All right, guys, I think we made our way through the super chats. So let me just go ahead. We made it through. Okay, so let me just go ahead and thank some people who made the stream possible. For some of my Subscribe Star friends over here, I want to thank F1F00C09. I want to thank Santa, yes, the big man that supports me on Subscribe Star. I want to thank E042530. I want to thank Easter Worshipper. Is that everybody? I think that's everybody. Make sure I didn't miss anyone there. Oh, and AWXYZ. Thank you all so much for your support on Subscribe Star. If you want to support over there, guys, you want to be thanked live on stream, you can support there. Also, my Substack. If you like listening to these things in the audio only format, I get asked all the time, Auron, how do I get this on audio? Because YouTube, it's burning a hole in my pocket when I watch it there. I turn all this stuff into audio podcasts that you can listen to on the Substack. That's also where I have my articles, and also where I have my book chapters. So if you want to support me there, that's also a great place to do so. I want to thank everybody who came out today. Lots of great questions, a lot of good discussion, big, nice turnout here, everybody, on a Friday night. So I appreciate you spending some of your Friday night with me. And of course, I want to thank, as always, one of the very greatest co-hosts. Everyone says, many people are saying, American Ostrakon. Thank you again, man, for joining me.
As always, it's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, we will see you again soon. And as always, I'll talk to you next time.